Hey guys, welcome to BP, the Bible Perspective. Let's talk about slave reparations and Jim Crow in the Bible that's usually ignored in this discussion. Now, before we get into it, please like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you ever thought a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. Now, I want this segment here. I found this old segment, about 2 years old, from Real Time with Bill Maher. And you can kind of see the beginnings of Bill Maher's journey that I like to say, and I'm poking fun, that he's coming out of the white conservative closet. Now, I say that because he has Charlemagne the God on there, and this was the time as he's talking about slave reparations. Normally, when he goes on his racist rant, it's usually in the company of an all-white panel who probably think a lot like him. In other words, they're tired of this black people complaints. They always talk about slavery, always talk about racism. Leave us in our quaint white paradigm. So I want to unpack this segment, but before I do, keep this in mind. I mentioned the Bible is also ignored because I'm coming from a Christian perspective. So even though I'm going to unpack their arguments here, understand many white evangelical Christians believe the same. They think the same. They think the same. Even if they have adopted black children, they still think like this old white point of view. And there's a lot to be said to there. I'm going to refrain. What I want to do before I unpack their video, I want to go to a couple of verses before we get into it. I want to share a couple of verses. Let me start with Exodus. Hold on, So I'm going to start with Exodus, and I'm going to come back to this. So Exodus chapter 12. Exodus chapter 12. And I want to read verse number 35. So the setting of this is the very night that the last plague was inflicted on Israel, the death of the firstborn. So literally, the Egyptians are packing, ready to march out of Egypt. So verse 35, he says, the Israelites acted on Moses' word and asked the Egyptians for silver and gold, jewelry, and for clothing. And the Lord gave the people such favor with the Egyptians in the Egyptian sight that they gave them whatever they requested. In this way, they plundered the Egyptians. So for 400 years of slavery, notice how God so afflicted the Egyptians that they gave them, literally loaded them with silver and gold and everything that they could ask for. Okay? And notice he said, in this way, and I want you to notice this term, in this way they plundered. Because later we're going to see how they're going to try to twist the definition of reparations. All right, Leviticus chapter 24, and I'm going to read starting at verse 17. It says, if a man kills anyone, he must be put to death. Whoever kills an animal, he is to make restitution for it, life for life. So I want you to notice the word restitution. If a man inflicts a permanent injury on his neighbor, whatever he has done is to be done to him. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Whatever injury he inflicted on the person, the same is to be inflicted for him. Whoever kills an animal is to make restitution. Whoever kills a person is to be put to death. So you see where we get the term an eye for an eye, okay? But I want you to notice that criminals, or to always pay restitution in some form. Okay. All right. Let's go to Numbers. Numbers chapter 5. And let's look at verse 6. Well, let's start at 5. It says, the Lord spoke to Moses, tell the Israelites, when a man or woman commits any sin against another, so this is what he's talking about here. When someone commits a sin against another person, he wronged this person. That person acts unfaithfully towards the Lord and is guilty. So notice that God takes it personally. The person is to confess the sin he has committed. He is to pay full compensation and add a fifth of its value to it and give it to the individual he has wronged. Okay? Notice he says, one, he is to do what? Confess it. So we're going to look at how, and I'm using Bill Maher's segment. It represents a lot of evangelical Christians. Verse 8, but if that individual has no relative to receive compensation. Now let me stop. So the reverse of that is, if a relative has, if the injured or the one who has done wrong has a relative, then they are to get the compensation. I just want you to look at that right here, because, see, again, in their argument, what's going to come up is, well, what about the ancestors? In other words, they're going to raise the question, should the descendants of slaves get reparations? Well, look at what he says right here. If an individual had, verse 8 again, no relative to receive the compensation, then he goes on to basically say it goes to the church or to the priest. But notice he said, so the meaning here, if there is a relative, that relative is to receive the compensation. All right. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 15. Deuteronomy chapter 15. And let's look at verse number 12. Now listen to this. If your fellow Hebrew, now let me stop for a moment. Notice fellow Hebrew. So if we are a nation Christians of biblical principles, fellow Americans, we're fellow Americans. If you're born on this soil, you are an American. If your fellow Hebrew, man or woman, is sold to you and serves you 6 years, you must set him free in the 7th year. Now, this was the one limitation of slavery. There were other slaves, and the whole issue of slavery in the Bible, not good for us, right? Doesn't look good for us. But notice what he says, because we didn't even obey this, in our American Christian principle country. Verse 13. Well, verse 12 again. If your fellow Hebrew or woman is sold to you and serves you 6 years, you must set him free in the 7th year. Now, a lot of people will try to use this as indentured service to try to get out of it. The Bible doesn't condone slavery. We're not going to go there, but notice what he says, verse 13. When you set him free, do not send him away empty-handed. Give generously to him from your flock, your threshing floor, your wine press. You ought to give him whatever the Lord your God has blessed you with. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord redeemed you. This is why I'm giving you this command today. So let's just think about this. Did America do this? In 1865, okay? In 1865, What did America do for the newly free slaves? Now, let me also say this, that not only did America did not do anything, they sent the slaves away empty. In some cases, they didn't even tell the slaves that they were free. Hence, this is why you have Juneteenth holiday. But notice here, in this Christian-based country, did we send them away? Were the slaves sent away empty-handed? So right here, those verses themselves make the case for biblical reparations. And all of the arguments that that they're going to make, I want you to remember. That's why I'm reading these verses first. So all of these arguments here, notice, all of these arguments will refute their claim that we should not pay reparations. All right. So here we go.
Last month, the Biden administration said, speaking of money, they want to study reparations. Study it. Compensate descendants of slaves for unpaid labor by their ancestors. Jen Psaki, the press spokesman, said, we'll see what happens in the legislative process.
And they're still looking into it. So in other words, nothing has moved in this area.
I'm curious where you are on this issue. I mean, there's a collective guilt that's asking individuals to recompense.
This is a straw man argument. I'm going to call BS on what he just said, and I'm going to call that a lie. Now, let me do a disclaimer. Are there crazies out there? Sure, just like when you had Me Too, there were crazies. For example, I remember there was an extreme feminist who was on an all-male panel one time, and she said, all men have committed rape. Now, all the men, of course, looked at her like she was crazy. But does she reflect women? Does she even reflect feminism? Now, if I wanted to just only use that occurrence there, I would be intellectually dishonest. So when Bill Maher says here that the collective is now trying to impose on the individuals, it's a lie. Who's doing that? Tell me who's doing that. Who is, like, for example, Bill, are they showing up at your doorstep saying, hey, write a check, Bill, you write a check. Now, where's your white neighbors? Let's go to your white neighbors. Are they flooding your neighborhood? This is nonsense right here. And again, when you make an argument like this, absurd, it just shows the true callousness of your heart, how you value African Americans. Let's continue.
I think that's how we would frame that.
Listen, I think reparations has to happen for black people. You know what I mean? Because slavery was America's original sin. And I really don't think no good is going to come to this country until they atone for their original sin, which was slavery. I mean, my ancestors literally built this country for free. So when you see all of this money being thrown around, you know, $27 trillion in national debt, $1.7 trillion for failed F-35 fighter jets.
$500,000 for dogs.
$500,000 for fucking dogs. It's like if you're black in this country, you have to be like, well, what the hell? What's up with us? You know what I mean? So for me personally,
but again,
I don't even see what the issue is. I don't even see
the issue is that that's.
Now, I agree with Charlemagne. The only thing I would say is reparation is not about just writing a check. It is about making the wrong right. In other words, it's about saying, hey, America did wrong. You have to start with that. America did wrong, and they never atoned for it. Let's continue.
The collective guilt, but individual white people are saying, I didn't do it, and my ancestors didn't even do it, and you are not your ancestors. That's
okay. Let's address that nonsense. First and foremost, I read you a scripture. This is from, again, for the Christian. That's why I read you a scripture that compensation and our laws are based upon that. For example, if you have a business and you're going to sell your business, right? Whoever buys that business also buys the debt. They also buy whatever lawsuits you may have out there as well. In other words, they can't buy the business. You defrauded a lot of people. Let's say like Trump, okay, who defrauded millions of dollars from people. In fact, one of the things he did, he wrote a check for $25 million to pay off some fraud he committed when he first was running for election. In other words, the point is, and he only did that because he was running for the presidency. All the time he wasn't going to pay it. just to be clear. The point is he had to make it right. See, remember the idea of slavery. Remember our nation, and we have to ask the question. Let's ask this question. How does a so-called Christian nation who says that we're built upon biblical principles? Now, evangelicals are saying that. What's worse is that, remember, in the Constitution, it is written that all men are created equal and endowed with inalienable rights by the Creator. How does that nation, who basically says freedom for all, turns around and enslaves a particular race of people? Worse, that particular race of people were also American citizens. In other words, you robbed American of their constitutional rights. How does a free-loving country do that? And by the way, especially when people talk about, well, there's slavery all over the world. Yes, true. But America is the only nation that claimed to be God-fearing. It is the only nation that claimed that all men are created equal and are endowed with inalienable rights by the Creator. So America is the only nation that has done that, unless you can show me another nation. And even if that's true, how does that make it right? Again, this shows the callousness of people who would do anything to stop African Americans for receiving their justice. And that's what this is about. Let's continue.
I'm a descendant of those ancestors.
I know, but okay.
Hey, listen, when a debt is old, a debt is old. Period.
But you've got a lot of money, so you say you should get more.
Again, this has nothing to do with status. So in other words, if Oprah Winfrey, who, I don't know who is the richest African American okay? I know she's up there. But if her ancestor was a descendant of slaves, that it wouldn't matter her wealth. America did wrong. Let me give you another example. The richest man in the world is worth about $150 billion, I think. I may be off on that, but anyway. Let's say he's walking down the street. He decides he's going to cross the street. Let's say I'm driving along. I don't see him, and I hit him with my car. Let's say I crippled him. Now, you're not going to say, well, he's the richest man in the world, so we can just let bygones be bygones. No, I did wrong, and the law would punish me for doing him wrong. That's how that's determined. Let's continue.
Should I get more?
Well, no, you should get a check.
Yes, I'm 97% West African, born in Charleston, South Carolina, so I should definitely get a check. But if it's to the point where, you know what, you make too much money, we don't think you deserve it, cool, give it to somebody who needs it. But to act like black people in this country don't deserve reparations is absolutely nuts to me. Hey.
Well, here's where I think Charlemagne is being naive. It's not about that. They really just don't want you to have it. Think about this. If someone was to say, okay, I got a solution. We're going to give each and every African American 1 penny. That's it. 1 penny. That's it. We're going to give each and every African American 1 penny. There would be white people who would oppose it for hate's sake. And that's what we're dealing with. It has nothing to do with whether or not they think, because remember, they're totally they're totally disregarding the damage that was done by America to its citizens. The fact that this was, and remember, it was an entire race of people that this happened to. So what happened in 1865? What happened in 1865 when the slaves were set free? You also have to think about it from this perspective here, that there were slaves that were never even told. This is why we have Juneteenth holiday. But what happened? What happened? Now here's another part of the equation, but I'm going to wait because I want to be able to address something, and then I'm going to bring up Jim Crow.
This is what I want. Put it like this. America, just treat black people like they're F-35 fighter jets. You had $1.7 trillion to throw at that bullshit. Throw it at the people who actually built this country.
But
I don't see how anybody can dispute that.
But again, you didn't build this country.
So what?
You personally did.
So what? I'm a descendant.
But I'm saying we can't write a check to a ghost, you know.
Why not?
Why not? Because
especially when the ghost's descendants are still
that's a descent.
Here. Okay. Listen, let me ask you a question. How do you right the wrong of slavery then?
Now, before I let him answer, because his answer is going to be nonsense. So here's what's also missing: the damage that was done to African Americans. But also, you want to say, well, the descendants of slaves. Remember, America's sin extends into the present day. So we have to remember that in 1619, slaves landed on these shores. Nearly 200 years later, in 1776, when the Constitution was written, African Americans were left as slaves. They were denied their constitutional rights. Who were Americans in 1776? Were they not those who were naturally born citizens? And yet there were naturally born slaves that America did wrong, passed laws, treated, afflicted, inhumane actions against its citizens. And the sin here, and let's just think about this for a moment when he says, well, when we talk about the idea that reparations are owed. During the war, December 7th, my birthday, 1941, not my birth date, but Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, thus escalating America into the war, World War II. Well, you remember something that happened back then? Somebody got the idea and said, you know what? The Japanese that live here in America might side with the Japanese. So what they did was they rounded up all of the Japanese Americans. And did I say Americans? And it put them in internment camps. In other words, so there are white people that have the same habit, right? In that case, history repeated itself. They deprived Americans of their rights. And in that case, what did America do? Well, America paid reparations to the Japanese Americans, right? Gave them opportunities. The problem, of course, with how Bill is callous towards the African American experience. And so even some evangelical white Christians are callous toward the African American experience, is that they say, well, my ancestors didn't do this. Really? Did they not? Did not your ancestors arrive through Ellis Island and benefited through Jim Crow? Did they not benefit? Did they not get money? Did they not have, they certainly didn't have the foot of this nation on their neck. You have to remember that Jim Crow started just under 20 years after the ending of the war and lasted all the way to 1965. Now, what that means is when you add slavery to Jim Crow, you're talking about almost 246 years how America did African Americans wrong. That's ended in 1965. That's just a little over 50 years. I was a little boy at the time when the Civil Rights Bill was passed. You see, this idea that they're saying that we don't want to talk about how sinful and ungodly and how wicked America was towards its citizens of color. This is the callousness that you see here. Let's continue.
Well, I mean, I think reparations can come in many forms.
Why not? Cash is king.
Frank,
It's America.
No, I agree. I mean, I think reparations do come in many forms. So we should be spending much more on the schools that serve black children. We should be spending much more on the infrastructure in black and predominantly black communities. We should be doing all sorts of things to close the opportunity gap, which is enormous and which we've done a terrible job closing. A debt is owed, and that's one of the ways you repay it.
Simply.
No, that's not a debt. We're already owed that. Good schools and good neighborhoods and job opportunities is already our right. That is not how you repay it. That is a cop-out. Because you see, what they're talking about, all Americans benefit from what he's talking about, not just African Americans.
The problem I have with the reparations conversation is the questions you were asking a moment ago. It's practically a non-starter. I mean, in terms of practicality, no one's going to agree on the terms. No one's going to agree exactly on the eligibility criteria. Nobody's going to agree on the amount, and it's politically very unpopular. And
who cares? Wait a minute. A war was fought because people didn't agree that slavery should end. There was a whole hard-fought civil rights war, in a sense, marches, because people didn't want segregation to end. That's not an excuse.
while we're talking about something that I don't think is passable, and that's why Obama didn't talk about it while
Why
he
is
was
it
in
not
office.
passable, though?
What?
Why is it not passable?
Look at public opinion polls. It's just not going to get done. And that's not about the merits. That's about the appeal out there. And in the meantime, there's so much we can and should be doing that could be called reparations about.
No, don't cheat reparations. And just because people don't like it, as I said, we've had 246 years of people trying to stop, to try to hold on to slavery, hold on to segregation. That's not an excuse.
The debt we owe.
Well, let's change the name. Call it economic equity packages. Whatever it is, as he said, a debt is
You
owed.
could say Obamacare, which helped black and brown people way more than white people. Obviously, all people can sign up for Obamacare, but that is the practical effect of it, is a...
And where is he getting this numbers from? Again, the Affordable Care Act was for all Americans. Welfare wasn't for reparations. There was a guy who made that silly argument years ago that, well, we pay reparations and welfare. Then why did you give it to white people? Why are more white people on welfare? Obamacare is for all Americans.
Form of reparations. You know, I mean, there's a tax that everybody pays. I don't think it's capped. You know, rich people pay more. those kind of solutions are different. I mean, listen to me what Glenn Larry says. He says, it frames the moral claims African Americans legitimately have in the wrong way. The idea this debt can be paid is a terrible idea.
Now, Glenn Larry is a black conservative. And I'm just going to kind of leave it at that because some black conservatives that do go out of their way to cuddle white people, even if they're racist. And that's all I'm going to say with that. So my point is, his opinion is no. So what? The fact that Bill Maher said, "Well, let me quote the black guy," has nothing to do with it because he's saying the same thing as Bill. In other words, Bill didn't have to say it, and the fact that Glenn Larry said it doesn't make the argument stronger at all just because a black guy said it.
That's his.
Here's the thing. Once again, it's white people not wanting to be held accountable.
Well, that's a black person.
Well, he's okay. A black person.
Glenn Larry said that.
Okay, what's his name?
Glenn Larry. You know Glenn Larry.
Well, I just think that it's a debt that is owed to black people in America. Simple. And I'll ask the question, if y'all don't think it should be cash, what should it be? If y'all don't think it should be, if there should be any reparations to black people, what should it be?
All right. So
no, I want to know, do you think that black people should get reparations?
I think it should be more like what Frank and I are saying. Different, not a check, no. I think it should be done more by class. I mean, 21% of blacks are below the poverty line. So that means we're giving checks to 80% of people who are not in poverty. Shouldn't it better?
Again, doesn't matter, right? The wrong was done. And by the way, during Jim Crow, black millionaires couldn't live in white neighborhoods. Black millionaires couldn't eat in the cafes, the lunch counters, okay? So again, the wrong is the wrong. But here we're dealing with the callousness of it. In other words, let's do anything except make it right. We don't care about black people. We shouldn't care about black people. He just don't want to say it, but that's what they feel.
Be done that if we're going to pass out money. That's not what I was starting the show with. If we're going to pass out money, let's pass it out
start with the poor and disenfranchised.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, and is a one-time check going to change a life as much as a real investment in education, as much as a real investment in young people's social programs?
I think.
No, but it's a good start. And you know, look, who cares? My point is, that's not the point to say that, well, if you're going to pass out checks, we pass out, people pay $1 and a person could pay $1 and buy a lottery ticket and become a multi-millionaire, a multi-billionaire. Who cares how they spend it? A lot of times they do blow through it. That's not the point. The point is what was wrong, and then how do you make it right? And if you did that, by the way, fine. And by the way, that's a part of it also of making it right. That's something that should have been done during slavery. In other words, hey, these people have been living, these slaves have been dehumanized since 1619. So in 1865, what was done by our great Christian nation to say, we need to help the people, acclimate them to their new life, educate them. So yeah, you can say that's a part of reparations. But yeah, writing the check is also a part of it also too. There was a thing called 40 acres and a mule to get them started. Why? Because America wronged them, robbed them from the opportunity.
I mean, I think a debt is owed, and I have no problem paying it in cash. I'm just talking about where the money goes to help the most number of people the quickest.
Yeah, I think it should be all of that simply because there is really no price point that you could put on reparations for slavery. Like none. Like there's no number you can put on what my ancestors went through in this country.
Yeah.
All right, and they are afraid to death of that because that is so true. How do you put the debt? For millions of black people, yeah, the country should pay the money. But that's not the problem, as I said before. The issue is not whether or not should it be paid. They don't want to pay it for hate's sake. Like I say, you wrong Japanese American. America did them wrong, unconstitutional, illegal, and they paid it. And time had nothing to do with it, because during the time that they was paying the Japanese reparations, there was still Jim Crow. It was still Jim Crow. So while they was making right for one segment of American population, they were still brutally, horribly, and humanely treating another, Black Americans. And that happened already in 1965. So we're not that far away. All right, guys, look, that's my perspective. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. And I will see you next time.